What do you make of this? Dave Chappelle is a brave man. He's managed, or he's had the temerity to stand up and say things like gender is a fact and that LGBT people are too sensitive. And throughout the closer show, he basically confronts the issues and probably says what other people don't dare to say. I would suggest Netflix, in my mind, so far to their credit, they've stuck by Dave Chappelle. They're refusing to put warnings on the show, and they're also not going to take it down. This is a freedom of speech issue, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I've watched it, and I know some of the trans activists objecting to it said it was going to cause death, and I certainly moderately died laughing. I thought it was funny. It's not 100% my cup of tea, but I don't want the man cancelled for some of his less favourable, quite sexist words that he uses. I'm quite happy for him to use them, and maybe I won't watch his show again and again and again, and I will survive.
Yes, I mean that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, I've watched bits of it, and I can see why people have taken offence. But being offensive is not against the law, and if you don't like something, turn it off. Don't watch it. He's got the right to say these things, hasn't he?
Yeah, look, if you watch the whole show, what I took from it is that he had a very dear friend who called themselves trans, and he's still in touch with that person's family. I think he does call him a man at the end, but he is totally respectful in his language. He goes way further than I ever would into actually capitulating to giving up some of his language. But he's got a trust fund for this man's children. I mean, I don't really understand what they're annoyed about. He said that they are, if I paraphrase, he basically said that they make a big old fuss about nothing and make demands of him as a black man, as privileged white men. And then just to prove his point, that's exactly what they've done.
I mean, if you giggle about this stuff, which is basically what Dave Chappelle is doing, he's not really taking it that seriously. He said, if this is what being cancelled is all about, I'm all for it. I mean, he just thinks it's funny. It does
Mm.
seem, and I'm not talking about all of them, but some of the trans lobby get very, very upset about not being taken seriously. And again, I think the trans lobby should be taken seriously, but also at the same time, anybody has the right not to take them seriously. And there was one particular demonstrator, a non binary TV show creator, a guy called Joey Soloway. He said that trans people are in the middle of a Holocaust, comparing it to the Holocaust, and that they are going through apartheid, murder, a state of emergency, a human rights crisis. There is a mental health crisis. But trans people are also out here dreaming to be alive, to be human, to belong, to have some time, which is privilege. So he's saying stop making things worse. But I mean, again, what's his name? Joey Soloway has every right, if he wants, to compare it to the Holocaust. But I might suggest, pardon my uh, um, uh, intolerance, but I might suggest that's a bit over the top to compare the plight of trans people with the Holocaust.
It's a grotesque thing to say, isn't it?
Mhm.
I mean, I'm smiling because it's so ridiculous, but it is actually a really quite hideous thing to compare, this entitled little movement to Holocaust is quite grotesque. But just the sort of the drama around, every single civil rights struggle that's ever happened, pulled it in like apartheid. No, what we're asking, what women are asking for, and what Dave Chappelle talked about, and actually Dave Chappelle would rather have so-called trans women in women's spaces. And no, thank you very much, Mr. Chappelle. But I certainly don't want that. But that's the apartheid is when it gets compared is women saying we don't want men in our space, and apparently that is some sort of apartheid system. But what Dave Chappelle talks about, which I think is a really quite serious point, is this whole notion of the sort of the racist threads going all the way through this, and how very entitled, privileged, often well off white men, and to use kind of the woke scale, then decide that they are the most oppressed minority on the earth as soon as they decide they call themselves women. And I think Dave Chappelle at the end said, you know, don't punch down on Black people. And so it's just fantastic that they come out and they're screaming and shouting about their rights to goodness knows what.
See, you know, I'm not sure. You and I are pretty much on the same page as this, although not entirely. My feeling about trans people is if they want to call themselves, if they want to be women and they want to be called women, I'm very happy to go along with it. And as I say, I just believe if, however you want to live your life, you go right ahead, and whatever makes you happy, I'll try and help you achieve that happiness. But what worries me about the trans lobby is it seems to be involved in the cancellation of women as an entity. So that, you know, in health campaigns in Scotland, I think you and I talked about it, for example, you know, women are excluded from the campaign and instead addressed as people with cervixes. You know, it is a recent campaign again in Scotland to let civil servants know about maternity leave. After discussion, they took the word mother out. You know, so mother, women, lady, female. It seems to me that there is a move to try and extract these words from our language, from our vocabulary, and I think that's sexist and wrong.
Well, 100% is. That's why I started the campaign with the billboard, the dictionary definition of woman on that billboard. It really is such a hateful and misogynist movement. To first of all, you dilute the words into the fact that they're meaningless, which is why I really do take issue about men being called women, because once you can then include men in women, then woman doesn't really mean anything anymore at all. And then you can start erasing the word woman from everywhere. In fact, the only people you're allowed to call women in 2021 are men. They're the only people. There's a first female admiral in America, 4-star admiral, and he's a man. Like even in the military, they are falling for this nonsense. It's insane.
Yes, I know, but as I say, I'll happily call trans people women. Of course, I will. But also, I want to retain. I demand to retain the right to call women women as well. I demand to be able to call you, Kellie-Jay, a woman and a mother. You know, not a person with a cervix. So I will call them women, but very happily. Anything that makes them happy, but not to the exclusion of people like you, who are commonly known as women, females, mothers. Do you see my point?
Yes, I do. Look, I can understand where you're coming from. I'm in a very different place because I do see the erosion and the erasure of women and our female language everywhere. And I think they're two of the same thing. But you know, if you feel that's where your limit in your language goes, then that's entirely up to you. I'm not going to come and protest talk radio.
Good. Well, you know, I'm on your side. I'm just a little bit more accepting of trans people if they are women, they say they're women and they want to be women. They want me to address them as women. Very happy to go along with it, but not to the exclusion of women. If you see my point.
Yes, so totally.
We're not, you know, Kelly, we're not a million miles apart, and it's always a great pleasure to talk to you. I really appreciate your contributions to my show.